All right, Genesis chapter 16. Genesis chapter 16. We're going to go through the whole chapter. What did we learn in chapter 15? Cheryl, you look like you want to answer. She's looking at me like this. Cheryl did not want me to call on her, but I did anyway. What have we learned thus far? Yes, ma'am, Miss Carol. So, fear, yes, ma'am. That's right. And what was that mentioned? What did God say? Don't be afraid. Right? He said, don't be afraid. So what? That's right. Absolutely it does. Absolutely. What else did we learn? Sure did. Reiterated his promise. Everything's... Go ahead, Chris. Sorry. Huh? That's right. How did that come? How did that righteousness come? That's right. By faith. Right? By faith. This is a... Go ahead. That's right. It was okay to bring his problems to God. That's exactly where he should have taken them, right? Before we take them to everybody else that we know, we need to take them to God first and see what God can work out, because God can work out anything. So, yeah, pretty good. So, Abraham's in a pretty good place right here, right? We think so? I believe so. I think he's in a good place. God confirmed his promises, did some pretty amazing things. It says that Abraham believed God and was accounted to him for righteousness, so that's pretty important. Really important, actually. So then we get to chapter 16. And in my opinion, I really like how brutally honest the Bible is. Right? And you'll see what I'm talking about, chapter 16. Let's read it. It says, Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid, it may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarai said unto Abram, My wrong be upon thee. I have given thy maid my eyes in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. But Abram said unto Sarai, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand, do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way of Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence comest thou? And whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hands. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? Wherefore the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. Y'all can't do any better. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, which Hagar bare Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old, and Hagar bare Ishmael to Abraham. All right, so we're going to see the cost of sin. The cost of sin. One man said, we need to be killing sin, or it will be killing you. And that's what we have to do in our life, right? We have to be constantly on guard, trying to kill sin. Another man said, sin always finds its root in our own selfish desires and self-gratification. Selfish desire here was Sarah, right? She wanted a son. She wanted a child. She hadn't had one in 75 years. She wanted a child, and she wasn't willing to wait on God. Another man said, the tempter or the tempted, who sins most? In this case, both sinned equally. Another man said, sin is looking for the right thing in the wrong place. That completely describes Sarah here. We would honestly think that after chapter 15, Abraham's faith would be at its height and that nothing would keep him from continuing to trust God. But we would be wrong if we assumed that. This is a story of Abram and two women, Sarah and Hagar. The result of Abram's lack of faith and distrust all around brings us to the first love triangle in history. Not the last, but definitely the first. In this chapter, we'll see rejection, anger, hurt, jealousy, vicious cruelty, and this is all due to sin. Life complicated itself, and there was no resolution in sight. Again, like I said before, the great thing about the Bible, it does not hold back. It's almost with plain language it goes through all this, right? We see all the dirt in this family. And again, I'm sure glad that I don't have all the dirt in my family logged in a book somewhere that people for thousands of years can read. But we have Abraham's. We have his. So the first thing we see, verses 1 through 6, is Sarah's scheme. We see the problem. Sarah was 75 at this time, and her barrenness was deemed a tragedy in that culture during that time, where it was a mark of success to have many children and a failure to have none. From Sarah's perspective, she was way past the age of bearing children. You remember chapter 15, the promise that God gave? He gave the promise of a son, and he gave a promise of the land, and he went in covenant with Abraham, right? Saying, I will uphold this. I will do this. Still wasn't enough. Still wasn't enough. So Sarah, in this chapter, would take care of what God had not done. The Lord has prevented me, is what she used the words. The Lord has prevented me. So we see the problem. She can't have a baby. We see the servant, Hagar. It mentions several times that she was from where? She's from Egypt. I just wrote simply down here, Egypt was back to bite Abraham in the tail one more time. He messed up that one time. Remember, a lack of faith, went down to Egypt and messed up. And now he's got a servant from Egypt, Hagar. We see the temptation. Who did the temptation come from? Came from his wife, the person he should have that he should be able to trust the most. It came from her, and it proved too much for Abraham to say no. You remember the guy who went into battle with 318 of his trained servants? You remember that guy? This ain't the same guy in this chapter. Different Abraham, different altogether. This is where trouble might have been least expected. One man said this is an old trick of the devil, to come to us with temptation from places of honor, trust, esteem, and popularity. Sarah's problem would have no problem with what Abraham and Sarah were doing. No problem at all. They would have been fine with it. They would have been like, yeah, that's a great idea. You definitely should do that. You definitely should do that, Sarah. Great idea. Society would not criticize or frown on the arrangements or despise the results. Instead, they would applaud. What society at the time did condemn and despise was not having any children. Now, I don't know it. I'm definitely guessing here. But they probably made fun of her. Oh, look at her. Not going to have any children. She doesn't have any children. She's too old. She's never going to have any. So they condemned that, not having any children. Sarah's polygamous solution was conventional and proper in the eyes of everyone but God, whose will had been expressed at creation. God had already told what and shown what a proper marriage was supposed to be like. And it was one man, one woman, not one man, one woman, and one concubine, right? This is immorality. This isn't, just because she gave that girl to Abraham to marry does not nullify that it was not immorality. It was immoral what they did. So we see the compromise. Look at his reply. Look at his reply. It's almost ridiculously easy here. At the end of verse number 2. And Abraham what? Hearkened to the voice of Sarah. Right? He just went along with the idea. A lot of different writers have a lot of different thoughts of why he went along, but I'll let your imagination go with that. So he compromises spinelessly. Not the same man that went out to fight the 4 kings. Then we see the sin. Again, culturally acceptable. How hard is it to continue doing right when the culture is so wicked? That's the problem that we're in today. Still, and it was the same back then. If anything, culture was probably worse back then. Seriously, it was probably worse. But today and age, it's not that great either. So he had a hard time. This is nothing short of immorality. This sin was made to seem to solve some of the problems in Abram's life. Right? Sarah said, I got a problem. I've got a way to solve it. Here's this little servant girl. Why don't you just take her to wife, and you can have a kid through her, and everything will be just fine. We're going to solve this issue. But it didn't solve any problems. All it did was create problems. And by the way, it is still creating problems today. This sin, thousands of years later, still affecting today. Pretty wild, isn't it? I don't think anyone who commits sin ever thinks that, it's going to have that long-lasting possibility there. But you never know. You have no idea. Then we see the pregnancy. This was at first desired, but not long after it occurred, it was no longer desired, especially by Sarah. Pride manifested itself very quickly after the pregnancy. Hagar got prideful, right? Why do you think she got prideful? Her mistress Sarah had never had a child. And she's like, I've done something you can never do. Must be a you problem, right? So Sarah's inability to become pregnant over the years had now caused Hagar to become very proud. She had achieved something that Sarah had not been able to do, and it went to her head. And then we see the blow up. Hagar conceives, she's pregnant, and Sarah places all the blame on Abraham and God. I like how she just completely distances herself from all responsibility. Abraham does exactly the same thing, and Hagar just runs away. Oh well, she gets sent away, but still, it's pretty wild. All right, so Abraham could have diffused this situation by affirming his love for Sarah and taking care of Hagar and be like, hey, I messed up. Let's just move on from here. But that's not what happened. He said, hey, your handmaid, your servant is in your hand. Do whatever you want to, Sarah. Just do whatever you want to. Men, how many times have you done that? I'll raise my hand. When your wife's upset about something, just go ahead and do whatever you want to do then. Just do whatever you want to do. Maybe I'm the only one. Ryan, I know you have. Thank God Ryan's here tonight. So he could have diffused it. There was a lack of responsibility all around. Abraham shied away from the responsibility completely. Now there's greater friction in the marriage than ever before. I'm sure it was difficult on them as a married couple. I'm sure their talks around the tent at night, I'm sure Sarah was like, well, when is this going to happen? God said it was going to happen. When is it going to happen? And Abraham's like, I don't know. Lord, he just said it was going to happen. I believed him. Right? I believed. 10 years, right? A long stinking time for them to wait. I can imagine the friction was greater than ever before. Sarah is hard on Hagar, sends her away. Everyone in this story brought so many problems into their own lives, and then they reacted poorly to those problems, which only created what? More problems. That's what sin does, y'all. That's what sin is. We have this in the Bible to know, hey, yeah, this guy is just like y'all. He screws up and messes up. But this is the cost of sin. If you want to mess up, you're going to have to deal with it. Right? There will be lasting repercussions for what you do. All this took shape when God's people decided that God needed a little help in fulfilling His word. God don't need any help. Sometimes it's wait. Hey, wait a little longer. And I don't know about you, I've been where Abraham's at. Like, man, I'm tired of waiting. Maybe God does need my help. Maybe He's just waiting on me to take a little action. Maybe He's waiting on me to take the steps. But He ain't. He don't need my help. Remember, He went through the covenant alone, right? He said, I got this. You just obey me and follow me and trust me. I got this. I completely understand where they are. Then we see God's grace. Verse number 7, the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain of the way to Shur. So God intervenes. Pretty amazing, right? They had messed everything up. They literally have, right? They've literally messed it all up. The marriage, the plan, the promise, all that stuff. They're messing it up. They didn't have any part in it. God said, I got this. Right? And they're like, let me just get in here and try to do something. They messed it all up. And God intervenes. Hagar was headed back to Egypt, meets the angel of the Lord. That was probably a theophany like we talked about last week. God had to intervene because of how much Abram and and Sarah have messed everything up. And we see forced reconciliation. What did God tell Hagar? What command did he give her? He's like, no, I understand where you are. You just head on back to Egypt. What did he say to her? That's right. Go back to your master. Why did he do that? What do y'all think? Why did he send her back?
He was going to give Hagar's son
That's true.
a nation of his own.
That's absolutely right. Yep. But that was the right thing to do, though, too, right? The reconciliation part of it. We can try to run from our problems all we want, but reconciliation is where it's at. That's what we as believers and people of God do. It's all right if you get mad at one another. That's okay. That's normal. But you better reconcile. You better get it right. Because it'll hinder you and everybody else. We got to get that right. God blesses her. He sent her back to humble herself, make things right with her master, and then God blesses her. You know she's the only matriarch that God blesses in this manner? The only one. The only one that God promises that this great seed would come out of her. The only promise. Pretty interesting. Ishmael means God has heard. God has heard. He would be the complete opposite of what Jacob and his 12 sons would be. And they would be at constant war with Israel. Guess what? Still at constant war with Israel. Even today. Most people think this is where the line of Muslims came through. Right? They both, if you've read the Quran or just read pieces of the Quran, I've read probably 3/4 of the Quran, that all goes back to Abraham. All of it. And from Ishmael. They both claim him as being father. Abraham, the father of the faithful, had begotten a wild man instead of a child of grace. He messed it up. Absolutely messed it up. Hagar gives the name to the well that she stops next to, the well of the living one who sees me. So there's kind of like a revival that happens down there, right? She meets God. God gives her this blessing. So you're going to have a son. There's going to be a lot of people that come out of this boy. A lot of people. All right? And then she says, hey, God hears me. This is the living God. I don't know if she got saved then or not. Some commentators say yes. Some say no. I guess we'll see when we get to heaven. But she says some pretty good stuff here. She names the well of the living one who sees me. Then we see the birth of the boy is born. The boy is born. Abraham names the child. Obviously, Hagar talked to Hagar during this time, and Abraham's 86 years old. From this mess up, from 16 to 17, which we'll cover next week, 13 years of silence. Next time we meet Abraham, he'll be 99 years old. This mistake, this misstep, I don't know. I really don't. But it makes you wonder what a mess life had become for them. The two women would never get along. There was nothing Abraham could do about it. Not a thing. We'll see later on that things get a little worse for Abraham, Hagar, and Sarah. Get a little worse in that situation. One man said, God will forgive, but some sins cannot be undone. You got to live with it. And that's the hard part, right? We make mistakes, and then you got to live with those mistakes. But God is still faithful. I want to ask you the question, and I was completely blown away when I was thinking about this. What did God do to get onto them? Did God call them out? What did God do?
He was sovereign.
So what?
Sovereign.
Sure was. He let them just live with that sin, didn't he? He let them live with the results of the sin. He didn't call them out and bash Abraham and say, I can't believe you would be immoral like this. I can't believe you would do this. Chapter 17, it gets even better. He blesses him again. Gives him more stuff. Right? More promises, more commitments, more things to do. Our God is a gracious God. That's who He is. We want to burn people at the stake. But that ain't what God does. God loves them, brings them back, shepherds them back, right? That's what He did with Hagar, right? That's what He did with the Egyptian servant girl. He went out and found her and brought her back and said, hey, just go back. Just go back. It's the right thing to do. Let's just go back. And she honored Him for that. That's the kind of God we serve. That's the God of the Old Testament. That's him. Just thought that was interesting. So Christian, beware. 1 Corinthians 12:10, wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. That's us. Sometimes we think we're untouchable, right? That, hey, God's been blessing, God's been doing stuff in my life, I can just let go a little bit. We can never let go. We can never let down the guard. Abram was immoral, all things considered, probably should have been kicked to the curb. But God didn't do that. He had to live with the results of his immorality, but God never gave up on Abraham. Application number 1, sin is tempting. I'm sure you guys know that. It's not rocket science right there, not big news. Sin is tempting. Sometimes temptation comes from the most least likely places and people. You've always got to have your guard up. You've always got to be on point, always. After a great victory, when you're tired, I don't know about you, when I'm wore out, I feel like I got to fight even harder. Or, hey, that was a great service this morning, you know. Let's just be lazy this afternoon. Let's just be lazy whenever. Let's just do this or that or what, you know. You've got to always be on guard. Number 2, the effects of sin last longer than the act. How long has this sin lasted? Still lasting? A couple thousand years? It's a long time. Sin takes. It never gives you what you think it will. Never. We say, this is okay. Just this little sin is fine. Just this little one right here is going to be okay. It'll always take from you. Well, I need to help God out with this. I need to do what God can't do. It'll always take from you. It never gives you what you think it will. It always lasts longer than you think it will. Even after forgiveness, you may have to live with the decisions that you have made. Broken relationships that may never be fixed. Be on guard. Be on guard. Number 3, sin affects more than just you. As we see it in this evidence. There have been millions and millions and millions of people affected by this sin over the 1,000 years. Millions. Sin always creates more problems. Sin will affect your family, your mental health, your life. There are no safe sins. There are no little sins. Sin always, always affects more than just you. Sin will always hurt others. Always. Well, if I do this, nobody will know. Well, if I get my phone out and do this, nobody's going to know. God knows. And God's got a good way of letting everybody else find out too. Christian, beware. Be steadfast. Be always ready. No days off. Isn't that the Clemson thing? Wasn't that the no days off? I'm redeeming that right now. I'm redeeming that for Clemson. No days off. We always got to wear that armor. We always got to have that armor of God. Every time we get up, we have to put on that armor. We have to get in the Word, grow in the Word, depend on God, feed ourselves from God's Word. When will we be able to rest? When we get to heaven. When we get to heaven. One man said, sin will take you farther than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you want to pay. That is a fact. So the cost of sin, it ain't worth it. It ain't worth it. So when I ask you next week what you learned, say, sin, it ain't worth it. And I'll be like, yes, sir. That's it right there. Any questions on that? No questions? God hears. Is that it? All right. Devin, why don't you pray for us? And we'll be dismissed. Appreciate it.
I would love for another shift forward tonight. I would be very much here. Lord, we just pray that the week, they Lord, go out to the week. Lord, just work our heart for the change of this grace. Lord, just thank you for every morning, Lord, that all you provide and let us do this day, Lord, to all short of glory. Thank you, God, we give Christ.
Man, we're dismissed.